I read that part of the will 3 times, trying to find some mistake, some confusion. There wasn't any. The apartment in Beacon Hill, the very same apartment where I'd spent hundreds of nights caring for her during her illness, where I stored her medications in neatly labeled boxes so she'd never miss a dose, where I held her hand through the worst episodes, was now officially my brother's. And the reason? My mother's words echoed with painful clarity. Since Liam has a family to support and Phoebe chose to focus on her career instead of having children, he has a greater need for financial security. In that moment, I felt like all my devotion, all my love and sacrifice had been reduced to the one thing I wasn't, a mother. What I didn't know was that this pain would end up triggering something that would change not just my life, but the lives of many families. My name is Phoebe Quinn. I'm 35 years old and a pediatric oncologist at Boston Children's Hospital. For those unfamiliar with the term, it means I spend my days battling cancer alongside incredibly brave children. Kids who, in many cases, barely get a chance to start living before they're forced to confront their own mortality. My routine has never been easy. I wake up at 5 a.m., often after only a few hours of sleep interrupted by emergency calls. At the hospital, every minute counts. Consultations, treatments, difficult conversations with devastated parents, and those rare but incredibly rewarding moments when I get to deliver news of remission. Over the past 3 years, that already demanding routine became even more challenging. My mother, Irene, was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. I reorganized my life to include regular visits to her Beacon Hill apartment, managing her doctor appointments, handling her medications, and taking care of all the small tasks that pile up when someone can no longer fully care for themselves. My colleagues often asked when I found time for a personal life. The truth is, I didn't. Between saving children during the day and taking care of my mother during every spare moment, there was little room left for relationships or for building what my mother considered a real family. But to me, my life had purpose and meaning. When you hold the hand of an 8-year-old during their first round of chemotherapy, or when you see the relief in a parent's eyes after hearing their child's tumor is shrinking, in those moments, you realize there are many ways to make a difference in this world. Sadly, my mother never fully understood that perspective. For Irene Quinn, a 72-year-old widow raised with traditional values, a woman's fulfillment was intrinsically tied to marriage and motherhood. It didn't matter that I was saving lives every day. To her, I had chosen a career over a family, as if the two were mutually exclusive, as if my choice was somehow lesser. "When are you going to make time for your own family?" she'd ask during our Sunday visits, as I checked her blood pressure. "Do you really think those kids in the hospital care about you the way real children would?" she'd question, completely disregarding the fact that many of my patients kept in touch for years after their treatment, sending me birthday cards and life updates. Still, I loved her. I loved the woman who taught me to read before kindergarten, who worked 2 jobs after my father died so I could attend good schools, who cried with pride at my medical school graduation. Our relationship was complicated, like many mother-daughter bonds are, but I never doubted her love, only her ability to truly see me. If you enjoy real-life stories that show how everything can change in an instant, click the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single episode like this. Believe me, what happened after my mother passed away was just the beginning of a journey no one could have predicted. My relationship with my mother was just one part of the complex dynamic within the Quinn family. My older brother Liam was 3 years older than me and had followed the path my mother considered right from the start. He married Brenda at 28, and, as if following a life instruction manual, they had 3 kids in quick succession. Liam worked as a mid-level sales manager at a building materials company. It was a stable job, but nothing extraordinary. Still, in our mother's eyes, he was practically perfect. And I'll admit, my nephews are adorable, and many times, I could see the joy they brought to my mother's life. "Phoebe, you should have seen how Tommy played baseball this weekend, just like his grandfather." My mother would light up completely when talking about her grandchildren. Then, almost inevitably, came the comment, "Don't wait too long. Sweetheart, your biological clock is ticking, you know?" What my mother conveniently ignored was how much Liam's perfect life depended on her financial support. The down payment for their house in Newton, a generous gift from her, the boys' private school tuition. My mother helped every semester. The annual vacation in Cape Cod, guess who paid for the rental beach house? When our mother fell ill, the family dynamic became even more unbalanced. Even though Liam lived only 20 minutes from her apartment, while I lived 45 minutes away, it somehow always became my responsibility to show up. Sorry, Phoebe, I've got a parent-teacher conference today. This weekend's no good. Tommy's got a game and I promised I'd be there. Brenda's not feeling well. You know how hard it is with the kids when she's out of commission. Meanwhile, I rearranged my hospital schedule, swapped countless shifts, and owed a mountain of favors to colleagues so I could be there whenever my mother needed me. Dr. Warren Hayes, my boss in the pediatric oncology department, was incredibly understanding, but we both knew my career progression was taking a hit. I missed out on research opportunities and the chance to present at major conferences because I couldn't be away from Boston for long. Brenda, my sister-in-law, had a particular knack for using the kids as a shield from family responsibilities, while simultaneously using them as trophies of her moral superiority. "Oh, Phoebe, such a shame you missed Emily's birthday. It was so special," she'd say, fully aware that I'd spent that day in the hospital, helping a child fight for their life. "But I get it. Your job is important too, even if it's just a job. Just a job." As if accompanying a child. Through months of treatment, learning their fears and hopes, being present during their worst and best moments, could ever compare to selling merchandise in a store. The most painful part, however, was seeing how my mother absorbed that narrative. Even though she expressed pride in my professional accomplishments when we spoke privately in front of Liam and his family, she would often downplay my work. "Of course, Phoebe's busy saving the world," she'd say with a slightly dismissive tone, "while Liam is here, building a real family." My best friend, Claire Martinez, a family law attorney, had witnessed many of these interactions over the years. "It's like you're running a race where the rules only change for you," she once told me after a particularly painful Thanksgiving dinner. "And the worst part is no one seems to acknowledge how much you actually do." Claire was right. Over the past 3 years, in addition to my work at the hospital, I had created a meticulous system to manage my mother's care. I organized her medications into weekly boxes with color-coded compartments. I kept a detailed journal of her symptoms and medication reactions to share with her doctors. I hired and supervised a caregiver for the days I couldn't be there. Liam, on the other hand, would occasionally show up with his kids for brief, cheerful visits, but rarely dealt with the less glamorous aspects of her illness. He never had to clean up after her when she didn't make it to the bathroom in time. He never woke up at 3 a.m. to an emergency call because she was struggling to breathe, and yet, in her eyes, he was the child who truly cared about family. Because he had children, and I didn't. The call came on a Tuesday, during a meeting with the oncology team. My phone buzzed repeatedly in the pocket of my white coat, the custom ringtone I'd set for my mother's caregiver. "I'm so sorry," I murmured to my colleagues, stepping quickly out of the room. "Dr. Quinn, it's Mrs. Reynolds. Your mother? She's unresponsive. The ambulance is on its way, but I thought you should know right away." Time seemed to slow in that moment. I ran down the hallway, shouted something to Dr. Hayes about a family emergency, and drove to Beacon Hill like a madwoman. But when I arrived at the hospital, it was already too late. Irene Quinn was gone. Heart failure, the doctor said. Quick and relatively painless. A small comfort. The next hours passed in a blur of tears and formalities. I called Liam, who arrived with Brenda an hour later, both visibly shaken. Despite our differences, we now shared a deep and genuine grief. There were forms to fill out, arrangements to make, people to notify. As a doctor, I was familiar with the bureaucracy of death, but nothing had prepared me for navigating it when it came to my own mother. In the days leading up to the funeral, Liam and I worked together with forced civility. He took care of the flowers and the church ceremony, while I handled the obituary and contacted distant relatives. Brenda took charge of organizing the post-funeral reception at her house, something she was undeniably good at. The funeral was beautiful in a heartbreaking way. The old church in Beacon Hill, where my mother had attended Mass every Sunday, was full. Neighbors, former co-workers, members of her book club, and even some of my patients and their families came to pay their respects. Liam gave a moving speech about the family traditions our mother had cherished, and I spoke about her strength and determination as a woman who raised 2 children on her own after being widowed at a young age. 3 days after the funeral, we gathered in the office of Arthur Hammond, the attorney who had handled the Quinn family's affairs for decades. A 75-year-old man with thick eyebrows and impeccable posture, Arthur had an old-fashioned air that matched the wood-paneled office and shelves of dusty books. "Before we begin," he said, adjusting his reading glasses, "I'd like to offer my sincere condolences. Irene was a remarkable woman, and I'll deeply miss our Thursday teas." Arthur cleared his throat and opened a worn leather folder. Irene Quinn's will is relatively straightforward. She left clear instructions about the distribution of her estate. Liam and I sat side by side, with Brenda next to him and Claire, my best friend and attorney, by my side. Claire had insisted on coming with me, saying it was always good to have a second legal eye in these situations. At the time, I thought it was overkill. Later, I would be grateful for her foresight. As for the personal property, Arthur continued, jewelry, furniture, and sentimental items are to be divided amicably between her 2 children, Liam and Phoebe Quinn. So far, nothing unexpected. My mother had some family jewelry, nothing particularly valuable, but rich in sentiment. There were also photo albums, some antique furniture, and her beloved porcelain collection she loved displaying during the holidays. As for the financial assets, Arthur went on, looking slightly uneasy, Mrs. Quinn held a modest investment, portfolio totaling approximately $180,000. These financial assets are to be transferred in full to her daughter, Phoebe Quinn. I felt a gentle squeeze on my arm from Claire. This was unexpected. Liam gave me a surprised look, but Arthur continued before we could process it. As for the property in Beacon Hill, the 2-bedroom apartment on Commonwealth Avenue, there was a noticeable pause. Irene Quinn directed that it be transferred in full to her son, Liam Quinn. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. The Beacon Hill apartment wasn't just my mother's home for nearly 4 decades. It was by far the most valuable asset she owned. A spacious apartment in one of Boston's most historic and expensive neighborhoods, the property was easily worth over $500,000, likely more. There must be some mistake. The words escaped my mouth before I could stop them. Arthur adjusted his glasses again, clearly uncomfortable. "There's no mistake, Dr. Quinn. Your mother was very specific." He turned the page and continued. In Irene's words, since Liam has a family to support and Phoebe chose to focus on her career instead of having children, he has a greater need for financial security. The justification hit me like a physical blow. All the air left my lungs. Beside me, I felt Claire stiffen with silent outrage. "This is..." I started, but I couldn't find the words. Unfair? Cruel? A final judgment on my life choices? I looked at Liam, hoping to see at least a flicker of discomfort, maybe even shame. Instead, I saw only a brief moment of surprise, followed by an almost immediate acceptance, as if he'd secretly expected it all along. Brenda, on the other hand, couldn't hide a subtle, satisfied smile. "Well," Liam finally said, breaking the tense silence, "I'm sure Mom gave it a lot of thought." That night, Liam insisted we get together for dinner, a kind of extension of the family mourning, he said. I agreed reluctantly, and we met at an Italian restaurant our mom had always loved. Dinner was torture. As we sipped wine and barely touched our meals, Liam and Brenda were already discussing plans for the apartment. "We're thinking of putting it on the market right away," Brenda said, cutting her lasagna into perfectly symmetrical pieces. "The real estate market is great right now, and honestly, there's no point in keeping it empty. Wouldn't you consider keeping it in the family?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It has so much meaning." "Meaning doesn't pay for private school," Brenda replied, with a light laugh. "And with our third starting high school next year, could I at least have a few weeks to go through the apartment?" I asked. "There are so many memories there. Photos, documents, things I'd like to keep before everything gets packed up and thrown out." Brenda took a sip of wine and looked at me over the rim of her glass. You have your prestigious job and freedom, Phoebe. We have 3 mouths to feed and futures to plan. Mom just recognized who really carried the family forward. The silence that followed was deafening. Liam looked momentarily uncomfortable, but didn't contradict his wife. I finished my wine in one gulp, placed some money on the table to cover my part, and stood up. Let me know when you decide on a date to clean out the apartment. I'd like to be there. I left the restaurant feeling a toxic mix of emotions: hurt, anger, betrayal, grief. I wasn't sure if I was more upset with my mother for her final judgment, or with my brother for so easily accepting the favoritism that had always existed between us. What I didn't know that night, as I walked through the streets of Boston, trying to process what had just happened, was that this moment of deep injustice would end up being the catalyst for something far bigger than I could have imagined. The next morning, after the disastrous dinner, I met with Claire in her office. I was still in shock, swinging between deep sadness and rage. "Look at this again," Claire said, spreading a copy of the will across her desk. "You got so focused on the apartment that you missed something important." She pointed to the section about financial assets. The $180,000 in investments, all of Mom's liquid money, had been left exclusively to me. "Why would she do that?" I asked. If she really believed Liam needed more financial security, maybe, Claire gently suggested, this was her way of balancing things, even if imperfectly. She was always better with property than with words. It gave me something to consider, even if it didn't fully heal the wound left by the justification written in the will. I returned to work the following week, trying to find comfort in routine. It was during a follow-up appointment with Miles Winters, an 11-year-old patient in leukemia remission, that my perspective started to shift. Miles, an extraordinarily perceptive child for his age, immediately noticed something was wrong. "You look sad, Dr. Quinn," he said as I reviewed his test results. I tried to smile. "I'm just tired, Miles. How are you feeling? Any symptoms come back?" He shook his head. "I'm good, but you're not. It's because of your mom, isn't it? My mom told me she passed away." I nodded, surprised by his frankness. "You know," Miles continued, with the kind of wisdom only kids who've faced their own mortality seem to have. "When I was really sick, I learned something important." "What's that?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You don't have to be a mom to be family, Dr. Quinn. You're family to all of us here. I have an amazing mom who loves me a lot, but I also have you, who saved my life. That's family too, right?" Miles's simple words struck something deep within me. Family wasn't just about who shared our blood or who we raised. It was also about who we chose, who we helped, who we loved in ways that went beyond traditional definitions. That afternoon, I watched the families in the oncology waiting room. Exhausted parents trying to stay composed, children playing, unaware of the seriousness of their conditions. A single mom sleeping uncomfortably in a chair, likely after staying up all night with her child. And then something clicked. The money my mother had left me, maybe there was a purpose for it that could honor her, even with our differences, while affirming the life I had chosen for myself. Have you ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you and later was shocked by what you were capable of? Share your experience in the comments. How often are we judged for our life choices, as if there's only one right path to follow? I'd really love to hear how you've dealt with similar moments. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with Dr. Hayes. As I explained my idea, I saw his eyes light up. "A fund for families of patients traveling for treatment?" he repeated, leaning forward in his chair. "Phoebe, this is exactly what we need." He confirmed what I had already suspected. Many families faced enormous financial burdens just to bring their children to Boston for treatment. Expensive hotels, eating out, hospital parking, lost workdays. The costs piled up quickly. "We're losing patients who could be saved simply because their families can't afford to stay in Boston for weeks or months," he said. "Your fund could literally save lives." In the following weeks, I worked tirelessly during my free time, consulting financial experts, nonprofit attorneys, and hospital administrators. Claire helped me with the legal aspects, often staying up late after her regular shift. The Irene Quinn Fund for Families in Treatment. I said to Claire as we finalized the paperwork. "What do you think?" She smiled. "I think your mother would be proud, even if she didn't completely understand it." While I worked on the fund, Liam and Brenda moved forward with their plans for the apartment. As promised, they let me know when they were about to begin clearing the place out. The day I returned to the apartment felt surreal. Every room held a lifetime of memories, both good and bad. I started sorting through personal items I wanted to keep: photo albums, a few sentimental pieces of jewelry, books we used to love reading together. In my mother's bedroom, I found a box filled with old letters, including correspondence with my father before he passed away. I decided to take everything. This was a part of our family story that no one else would value the way I did. Liam arrived later that day to start cataloging furniture and larger items. We worked in silence for a few hours, each in a different room, until I heard him call me from the office. "Phoebe, you should see this." He was sitting on the floor, surrounded by neatly labeled folders. They were all of our mother's medical records, organized chronologically, with detailed notes written by me, medication adjustments, symptoms I observed, questions for doctors. "You did all this?" he asked, flipping through the pages. "Someone had to." He kept going through the folders, also uncovering records of bill payments, appointment reminders, and grocery lists with our mother's favorite foods marked. I had no idea. He murmured, more to himself than to me. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. He had chosen not to see my dedication all these years. A late moment of clarity wouldn't change the past. 2 weeks later, I received a message from Liam. The apartment had sold for a surprising amount, $850,000. Boston's real estate market was booming, and a buyer in love with the historic charm of Beacon Hill had made an offer well above the asking price. When I read the message, I felt a twinge of sadness knowing our mother's home would now belong to strangers. But I also felt something unexpected: relief. The apartment, with all its conflicting memories, was no longer between us as a symbol of our mother's favoritism. That same afternoon, I finalized the paperwork for the Irene Quinn Fund. With my $180,000 as seed money, the fund would begin operating within a month. Dr. Hayes had already identified 3 families to be our first recipients, including a single mother from Maine whose 7-year-old son had recently been diagnosed with the same type of leukemia Miles had overcome. When I sent Liam the news about the fund's launch, I didn't expect a reply. I figured he'd be busy, planning how to spend his new fortune, but to my surprise, he called me that night. "A fund in Mom's name?" His voice sounded genuinely curious. "Why?" "Because despite our differences, she cared about family," I replied. "This fund will help families stay together through difficult treatments." I thought it was a fitting way to honor her name. There was a long pause on the other end. "Tommy asked about you yesterday," Liam finally said, shifting the subject. "He has a school project about medical careers and wanted to know exactly what Aunt Phoebe does." "And what did you tell him?" "The truth. That his aunt saves kids with cancer. That she's probably the most important person he knows, even if he doesn't see her much." I didn't know how to respond to that. It was the closest Liam had ever come to acknowledging the value of my work. "He wants to interview you for the project," Liam continued. "If you have time, of course." "I'd love to," I said, genuinely touched by my nephew's interest. The following week, Tommy came to the hospital for the interview. The visit turned into a short tour of the department, where he met a few patients close to his age, including Miles. I watched with interest as my usually chatty and confident nephew looked at those children with a mix of admiration and newfound understanding. "These kids are really brave," he commented on the way back to my office. "They really are," I agreed, "and so are their families." Tommy was silent for a moment, thoughtful. "I think I understand now why you don't have kids of your own," he finally said. "You already have so many children to take care of here." That simple remark, coming from a 12-year-old, touched me deeply. Tommy saw in minutes what my own mother never managed to see in decades: that my life, although different from the one she had imagined for me, was full of purpose and meaningful connections. That night, Liam called me again. "Tommy won't stop talking about the visit to the hospital," he said. "Apparently, you're the coolest person in the family now." I chuckled. "Don't worry, that'll wear off." "Maybe it shouldn't." Liam's voice sounded strangely serious. He asked me some tough questions on the way home, about why we don't visit you more often, about why we never helped Grandma when she was sick. "Liam, you don't have to—" "No, I do." He cut me off. "I've been thinking a lot since I saw those folders in your apartment, about how much you really did for Mom while I accepted your financial help for my kids but rarely gave back with my time." I stayed quiet, surprised by this sudden self-reflection, and then we sold the apartment for nearly $1 million while you took what Mom left you and created. Something that's going to help families you don't even know. His voice broke slightly. Makes a man question his values, you know. 6 months after my mother's death, we organized a small event to officially launch the Irene Quinn Fund for families in treatment. The hospital conference room was simply decorated with a banner for the fund and photos of the first families who had benefited. Sarah Collins, the single mom from Maine, was there with her son, Jason. After 2 months of treatment in Boston, the results were promising, and the relief on her face, knowing she didn't have to worry about housing or meals while caring for her sick son, was the best possible testament to the fund's value. I invited Liam and his family to the event, sending a formal invitation a few weeks prior. It was an olive branch, even though I wasn't sure they would accept it. As I was adjusting the final decorations and checking that the small buffet was in order, I saw Dr. Hayes quietly wave from the doorway. Standing next to him were Liam, Brenda, and their 3 children, all dressed formally for the occasion. "I hope we're not late," Liam said, looking slightly uncomfortable but determined. "You're right on time," I replied, genuinely happy to see them there. The ceremony was short and emotional. Dr. Hayes spoke about the impact the fund was already having. Sarah shared her story in a touching way, describing how the fund's support allowed her to focus solely on Jason's recovery instead of constantly stressing about finances. When it was my turn to speak, I looked out at the small crowd gathered. Hospital. Colleagues, recipient families, friends, and my own family sitting in the front row. The Irene Quinn Fund was born out of personal loss, but it became something greater than I could have ever imagined, I began. My mother deeply valued the concept of family, even though we didn't always see eye to eye on what that meant. Today, I understand that family goes beyond blood ties or traditional definitions. Family is the connection we form when we truly care about the well-being of others. I saw Liam nod slightly, his eyes shimmering with what looked like held back tears. After the ceremony, as guests chatted and enjoyed the appetizers, Liam approached me holding an envelope. "I have something for the fund," he said, extending the envelope toward me. Inside was a check representing 20% of the proceeds from the apartment sale, $170,000. "Liam, this is—" I was speechless. "It's the least I can do," he said. "Mom was wrong, you know." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Family isn't just about who you raise, but how you care for others, and you've been doing that all along." I hugged my brother then, tighter than I had in years. For a moment, we were just Liam and Phoebe again, not rivals in some imaginary competition for our mother's love, but siblings bound by shared memories and a newly found desire to honor the best of her legacy. If this story moved you in any way, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more true stories that show us the power of human resilience. Your support allows me to keep sharing narratives like this, stories that reveal how much we can grow, even through the most painful experiences. A year after my mother's passing, the Irene Quinn Fund had helped 12 families. Thanks to Liam's generous contribution, we were able to expand the scope of our support, offering not only housing and help with food costs, but also assistance with transportation, care for siblings, and even counseling for parents dealing with the stress of having a seriously ill child. My relationship with Liam and his family had also evolved. We now gathered monthly for dinners, alternating between my apartment and their home. Tommy, my oldest nephew, started volunteering at the hospital on weekends, reading to younger children and helping with recreational activities. "I want to be a pediatric oncologist like Aunt Phoebe," he announced recently, to the obvious pride of his parents. Brenda and I still had our differences, but we had found a mutual respect that had never existed before. She used her organizational talents to help plan a fundraising event for the Irene Fund, which ended up raising over $50,000 in donations. One quiet autumn afternoon, while organizing documents for the fund's annual report, I came across a box of papers I had brought from my mother's apartment but never fully gone through. Inside was a yellowed envelope with my name written in her familiar handwriting. The letter was dated 5 years earlier, during a time when my mother had been briefly hospitalized before her diagnosis of heart failure. Apparently, she had written it but never delivered it. "My dear Phoebe," the letter began, "today I watched you speak with my doctors. I saw the way they listened carefully to every word you said, how they respected your knowledge and your perspective. I saw you translate complex medical terms so I could understand, saw you ask questions I didn't even know needed asking. I realized something I may have always known but rarely acknowledged. You are a remarkable doctor, not just because of your knowledge, but because of your compassion. Because of your ability to see the person behind the patient. I know I've pressured you over the years about marriage and children, maybe because that was the path I knew, the only one I truly understood. But today, as you organized my prescriptions and patiently explained each medication, I understood that you help other mothers have more time with their children. You give families the most precious gift possible, hope and time. I may have never fully understood your choices, but never doubt that I respect the doctor and the woman you've become. With love, Mom." Tears streamed down my face as I read and reread those words. It wasn't a full acceptance of my choices, nor an apology for years of painful comments. It was something more subtle and perhaps more real, a moment of genuine appreciation, a glimpse of understanding. In that moment, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since her death. The Irene Quinn Fund, which had begun as a response to a perceived injustice, had become something far more meaningful, a true tribute to the most compassionate parts of my mother, and an affirmation of the choices that had shaped my own life. Carefully placed the letter in my desk drawer. It didn't erase the past, nor change the fact that my mother and I never fully understood each other. But it offered a new perspective, a window into a quiet recognition she had kept to herself. Our journey through life rarely follows the path others lay out for us. Family expectations, especially those rooted in traditional values, can weigh heavily on us, making us question our choices even when we know in our hearts that we're walking the right path for ourselves. What I've learned through this painful experience is that we can honor our family ties even when we choose to live differently. We can turn hurt into purpose, disappointment into service, and expand narrow definitions of family to include everyone whose lives we touch. Did my mother leave me an apartment? No, but she left me something that, in retrospect, was far more valuable: the opportunity to define my own legacy, to create something that reflected both the best of her and the best of me. The Irene Quinn Fund continues to grow, as does my understanding of what it truly means to be part of a family, whether it's traditional or built through the meaningful connections we make throughout our lives. And maybe that's the true legacy we all hope to leave behind. Not just material possessions or even our DNA, but a positive impact that reaches far beyond ourselves, touching lives we may never meet, creating ripples of kindness that carry on long after we're gone. After all, isn't that what family really means? Caring deeply for others, being present in the hard times, celebrating the victories, and leaving the world just a little better than we found it.